What's up, guys? This is the Musical Nihilist, and we're back with match number 2 of draft number 2. So, yeah, this duel is particularly funny because I made a lot of misplays. By this point, I think it was maybe 3 or 4 in the morning, and when you play Yu-Gi-Oh! For about that long, you're bound to make a lot of mistakes. So, I hope you guys get some enjoyment out of that. Alright, so for round 1, Harmon starts off with one set monster and a back row and passes it back to me. I respond by normal summoning Cyber Valley and pass it back to Harmon. Harmon activates Change of Heart on his turn. He takes control of my Cyber Valley and tributes it for Archfiend Giant. And with the Archfiend Giant, he attacks directly, dealing 2400 damage to my life points. Then he sets a back row and passes it back to me. On my turn, I normal summon Lila and I attempt to attack over his face down monster, but he activates Forceful Sentry, which gives him knowledge of my hand and he gets to discard a card. So he decides to discard my Chaos Sorcerer. The Forceful Sentry also negates the attack of my Lila, so during my main phase 2, I switch it to defense position to destroy one spell and trap card on the field, and I end up destroying his Nightmare Wheel. Herman actually forgets that he can chain Nightmare Wheel to stop my Lila from going to defense position. He actually did it in the last match if you guys saw the last video, so I don't know how he misplayed that hard. And for those of you that haven't noticed it, I forgot to mill 3 cards with Lila. So on his direct attack, I chain Phoenix Wind Blast to top deck his Giant Archfiend and he passes it back to me. Then on my turn, I banish 2 light monsters to special summon Soul of Purity and Light, and I attack over his armed dragon, dealing 100 damage to his life points. Then I set 1 card and pass it back to him. Herman draws on his turn, and he just sets a card and passes it back to me. So far, the duel is going pretty slow. So on my turn, I attempt to attack over his face down, and it ends up being a Heroic Challenger Sword Shield. So right now we're kind of in a stalemate. I just set a back row and pass it back to him, and he also sets a back row, but he decides to break the stalemate by tribute summoning his Heroic Challenger Sword Shield for Giant Archfiend. The effect of my Soul and Purity Light does reduce his attack to 2100, reducing the damage dealt to my life points, but it does destroy my Soul and Purity Light. He summons Warrock Wento and attempts to attack into my face down monster, which is a Shining Pisophilia and cannot be destroyed by battle. When I attempt to activate its effect to gain a counter when battled, he goes for Solemn Strike, but I respond with a Solemn Judgment, which may be a hefty cost, but I need to maintain some kind of board presence to prevent myself from getting OTK'd. On my turn, I summon Giant Orc and attack into his face down Kwaki Mary Drago, which he attacks over with his Warrock Wento and passes it back to me. On my turn, I draw, and I end up using Karma Cut to get rid of his Giant Archfiend, discarding my Paleozoic Dinomischus. Then I set a monster and pass it back to him. He draws return, and then on his turn, he just proceeds by setting a monster and attempts to attack over my face down. Although his attack isn't high enough, Wento can pay 800 life points to increase its attack by 800, so he beats over my face down monster. Then on my turn, I just set a back row and decide to pass it back to him, but he pays 1000 life points to banish my face down Royal Oppression with his Cosmic Cyclone and then passes it back to me. On my turn, I set an additional back row and pass it back to him, and then he decides to go for a tribute set, tributing his Marensis monster. And on my turn, since things are going pretty slow, I activate Pot of Dichotomy to shuffle back my Chaos Sorcerer, Soul of Purity and Light, and Cyber Valley to draw 2 cards. And this is the part that's actually really funny because I shuffled my deck and then Hermod cut it, because after drawing my 2 cards, I end up drawing back into the Chaos Sorcerer that I shuffled back in. So I'm not really sure how that happened, but sometimes that's just how things go. So I banish 1 light and 1 dark to special summon Chaos Sorcerer, and then I'm going to use its effect to banish Wento to protect it from getting beaten over. Then I activate the Great Noodle Inversion. It's an interesting card because it lets you add the bottom card of your deck, kind of like a reverse Jar of Greed, And then I also chain my Paleozoic Dinomyscus from the graveyard to special summon it as a monster, and then I immediately tribute summon it for my Chaos Command Sorcerer, and I pass it back to Herman, hoping he doesn't have an out from my board. On his turn, he flip summons his Shadal Beast that he tributes set, which allows him to draw 2 cards and discard a card, and he ends up discarding his Malevolent Catastrophe. Then he normal summons Goblin Attack Force, and he activates Skill Successor to boost the attack of his Shadal Beast, beating over my Command Magician and dealing some damage, and then he attacks over my Chaos Sorcerer with his Goblin Attack Force. I feel like he could have dealt a little more damage, but I digress. On my turn, I draw and I just set a monster and pass it back to him. Then on his turn, he decides to attack over my face-down monster with Shadal Beast, which is revealed to be a Spirit Reaper, which can't be destroyed by battle. However, that Spirit Reaper ends up turning into a liability when he summons his Spear Dragon, which can deal piercing damage. And then he sets his Goblin Attack Force to attack mode, and on my turn, this is where I made a huge misplay. I should have just banished the Spirit Reaper with my Cyber Valley so I can draw 2 more cards, but he just used the Spirit Reaper as a window straight into my life points, which leads him to winning the round. So yeah, a lot of misplays from both our ends, but again, that's just something that happens when you play Yu-Gi-Oh! For hours straight. I open with Cyber Valley and set a back row and just pass it back to Herman. Then he summons Goblin Attack Force, attacking straight into my Cyber Valley for some reason, which allows me to draw a card, and sets his Goblin Attack Force to defense position. On my turn, I draw, and then I use Nobleman of Extermination to get rid of his back row. However, I don't actually know what I banished, but I do summon Cupid Volley, which attacks over his Goblin Attack Force. On his turn, he uses Premature Burial to revive the Goblin Attack Force and tributes it for a Giant Archfiend. Then on his attack declaration, I activate Memory of an Adversary to banish it, and hopefully to special summon it on the end phase of his turn. Then during my standby phase, Cupid Volley goes to level 5, and then I summon Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer. Kaiku deals direct damage, which lets me banish his Goblin Attack Force in the grave. Then I deal direct damage and pass it back to Herman. On his turn, he sets a back row and passes it back, and this is where I misplayed again because I forgot that I can revive his Giant Archfiend from the Banish Zone to my field. So on my turn, I just go for Neo the Magical Swordsman, and it looks like Herman's getting a little desperate since he discards his Shadal Beast with Regeki Break to destroy it, and in a way to reduce the damage, but I end up banishing it with my Kaiku and leave him with 100 life points. On his turn, he sets a monster, 1 back row, and passes it back to me, but on my turn, I use Lila to get rid of the back row and attempt to attack over his field. And the card destroyed ends up being a skill successor, but I don't think it ends up mattering. But the face down monster does end up being a Libromancer, which deals 200 points of defense damage to my life points. So on his turn, he uses Change of Heart to take over the Kaiku, then he banishes my Cupid Volley and dons Luke from my graveyard, dealing some damage, but the Kaiku does go back to me during the end phase. Then on my turn, I sacrifice Delilah to tribute summon for Chaos Command Sorcerer, which beats over the Libromancer and allows my Kaiku to attack for game. So overall, a pretty quick game, and now we're down to round 3. So even though I misplayed, I somehow ended up winning that, but I think Herman is also misplaying too, because I think we're just really tired. He sets 1 monster, 1 back row, and passes it back, and here comes Cupid Volley again, which attacks into a sword shield, dealing some defense damage to my life points. So I just set 2 back row and pass it back to him. On his turn, he tribute summons for Thestalos, and with the effect of Thestalos, he ends up discarding my Mad Archfiend from my hand, dealing 400 burn damage, but he's not the only one with burn effects, because I have my Ring of Destruction to destroy his Thestalos, dealing 2400 damage to both of us. Then on my turn, Cupid Volley gains a level, and I attempt to attack for direct damage with my Neo the Magical Swordsman, but he tries to block my attacks with my Scapegoat, and I respond with Imperial Order, but he responds with Nightmare Wheel to stop my Cupid Volley, and the Imperial Order ends up being my undoing. In combination with his Nightmare Wheel, I end up taking 1200 points of damage on his standby phase. And what ends up being the nail in the coffin is his Spear Dragon, which beats over my Giant Orc with 0 defense. And that's 2-1 game. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I know that this one had a lot of misplays, but hopefully you guys got a kick out of it. Alright, see you guys later.